So, hey everybody, I am Dr. Ebony. I am a licensed psychologist in Texas, and I am a food relationship strategist. On the psychology side of things, I work with women around trauma and getting back to knowing themselves, regaining their power, and learning how to communicate, regulating their emotions. On the food relationship side of things, I work with women around helping them move from a diet culture lens in their food engagement to more of an empowered relationship with food where they're releasing the shame, releasing the guilt, and showing up with food from a place of ownership, power, and confidence versus feeling like a failure or feeling shameful every time we eat something. Okay. So, what I'm going to be talking to you about today kind of is a blend of those two things. I'm going to be talking about shedding the cape, shedding the superwoman cape to be exact. This particular conversation is going to be geared towards helping Black women understand why it's so important to invest and take care of our mental health, and why getting rid of that cape is actually beneficial to us, and how that cape actually hinders us more than helps us. Okay. So I'm going to be providing some cultural context to that, and also providing some practical ways that you can start shedding that cape today. So if we go back historically, right, thinking about Black women in this country and ways that Black women have kind of been thought about, talked about, stereotyped, we have four particular stereotypes that have been kind of consuming Black women since the beginning of time, and that's the matriarch, the Jezebel, the sapphire, the mammy. So these particular stereotypes have been how people have thought about Black women, representation of Black women in media, culture, and basically showing these very negative sides of who Black women are. So the superwoman stereotype was one that was born out of this need to shed those particular stereotypes. So Black women said, no, we are not Jezebels. We are not. And actually, if we are owning our sexual power. We're owning our sexuality. We are not just mammies. We are not just matriarchs. We are not just sapphires. We're not the angry Black woman. We're superwoman. We can do all things. We can be strong. We can take care of everything. And we've seen that in history, right? We've even seen that in 2020. Like, if you're thinking about the things that are happening around us, Black women are holding a lot of this stuff together. We're holding families together. We're holding this country together. We're holding people accountable. We're creating change, all of those great things. And that, while that's great, it also kind of diminishes the ability for us to kind of pour back into ourselves many times. So when we have this strong Black woman stereotype that was created, kind of gave Black women a boost, gave us permission to take up room, but also it comes at our detriment. And some of the ways that it comes as our detriment is that everybody else around us is taken care of, everybody is uplifted, and we're oftentimes forgotten and neglected. And you may see that in the ways that you carry stress. You may see that in the ways that guilt and shame shows up for you, especially around putting yourself first. So you may kind of start to feel a little bit of that when you kind of go out and have a day for yourself, especially if you're a mom or you're a person who is taking care of other people. You kind of would put people before yourself, and that looks like cooking, making sure everybody is eating, making sure the house is clean, making sure the church is taken care of, making sure pastors taken care of, making sure all the ministries have what they need. We're continuing to pour out into other people without actually putting a lot of that back into ourselves. So what we end up doing then when we put that cape on is we end up kind of covering up a lot of the things that we're feeling. So we end up, I'm doing this to show that we're pressing down a lot of the things that we're feeling. Every single time we make a to-do list and we're nowhere on that to-do list, as that strong Black woman, as that superwoman, we're continuing to push things down, especially if there is something calling out in us that is warranting our attention, that is saying, hey, you need to kind of pay attention to this. You need to set a doctor's appointment. You need to go take time for yourself to get a breather. You're really stressed. Your body's aching, your joints are aching, you're having hip pain, because these are all the ways that stress shows up, right? Like, you're carrying stress in your shoulders, you have tension, you're anxious, you don't really know why, you're crying, you don't really know why, you're sad, but don't really know why. And all of these things kind of compound. And the more we throw that cape on, the more we're covering up those issues that are going on. And the more we are denying ourselves the right and permission to actually take care of the people who matter most, and that's us. So I want to talk about why that's so important to mental health. I'm talking about the physical manifestations of all of this, but even more so, we are seeing an uptick in suicide among Black women. I know historically we've kind of learned that suicide is not a Black person's thing. That is absolutely false. Suicide is absolutely a Black person's thing, and it is even more a Black woman's thing. And this is what happens when people feel like there's no hope, people feeling like there is nobody to who they can call on when they are the people who are usually called on. And what that then does is that puts us in a position where we feel like embarrassed and we feel shame if we are to kind of reach out to somebody and we are thinking, I can't tell you how many times I talk to clients about this who say, you know what, I am usually the person who people call on, so it feels really yucky for me to ask somebody for help. So us being ashamed to ask for help, us being ashamed to say, hey, can you do this for me? So that delegation becomes something that we struggle with. And then again, remember that cape we have on continues to become a weight. It becomes the weight of the world. And when we have the weight of the world on our shoulders, we're thinking that there is no way out. And then sometimes suicide becomes the answer for a lot of people. And I know some people, I've talked about this many times with others, and kind of like that faith aspect of it too, kind of sometimes helping us to kind of carry that weight a little bit more, but we're going to need more than prayer. All of that is going to work, and we're going to need to combine those as our superpowers. Okay. So as we talk about today, shedding the cape, we're going to learn to combine some other things and not to just have one particular thing that we turn to. So some practical things that you can actually start to do is prayer is wonderful. Prayer is great, right? So we want to keep that, but we also want to add to that. So we want to build a support system of people that can not only benefit from us, but who can help us. A lot of times as strong Black women, we tend to build friendships, relationships, foundations with people off of what we can offer them. It's time for us to really start thinking about what can these people also offer me. This becomes a reciprocal relationship. This is important for your mental health, because in those days when time or it feels like it's too heavy, you're going to need to also welcome in somebody who can help you carry that load. That way you're making room and clearing out the mental clutter, the emotional clutter that is taking up space. But if we're only building friendships, relationships, families off of what we can give, we're constantly we're being a disadvantage to ourselves. Okay, so those are two things. The other thing is I want us to tap into the messages. Where did we receive the message that we had to be everything to everybody? Where did those messages come from? Who did we hear say those things? What did we see modeled to us? So did we see that coming from mama, grandma, aunties? Who is it that we saw as a strong Black woman? And not only who did we see, we want to think about what did we see happening to their mental health. I work with a lot of clients who say, my mom was extremely anxious and she didn't even know it. Everything had to have its place. She was really neat about cleaning, and everything had to be in order, or she would freak out, or she would yell, or she was stressed, or she was emotionally unavailable. So while we're busy kind of doing all of these things for everybody, we have to think about ways that we're sending messages to the people who are in our lives, those little ones, those women that we're raising, those men that we're raising, those partners that we're in relationship with and community with. We have to think about the message that we're sending. Also, when we begin to shed that cape, it gives us permission to be fallible. It gives us permission to be human, so we can take that into the doctor's office, because we know that Black women are hugely unheard in the medical space. Okay, we know that there's a disproportionate rate of death amongst Black women, especially when they're giving birth. So we want to make sure that we're advocating for ourselves, but we can't advocate for ourselves if we are not shedding the things that are happening to us, like guilt, like shame, like feeling like a burden. So let's tap into that guilt. And one of the ways that you can do that is to ask yourself, does this guilt make sense? Have I done something wrong? Is taking care of myself wrong? And it may have you loop back around to that message that you received when you were younger about, or from the people around you, that you are selfish if you don't take the time to yourself, or if you do take the time to yourself, excuse me. That is not selfish. That is actually self-care. So that leads me to the next point of, let's up our self-care game. Self-care is way more than bubble baths and chocolate and Netflix. While those things are great and amazing, let's up that. Let's take that up a notch. Okay, let's take that up a notch, and let's do things that are actually going to pour back into us for the long term, that are going to be sustainable. Let's make those doctor's appointments. Let's get a therapist. Okay, let's talk to somebody about all the weight of the world that we feel upon us. Let's begin to process some of those things, the problematic patterns that we're engaging in that is continuing to deplete us. Let's build a support system of girlfriends, community who can help us and who we can lean on. That may not be your immediate family. That may be people in the community, people who you meet online. But let's let that be our cape. Let's let that be our cape instead of us feeling like we have to do everything. Let's tap into that shame, that embarrassment about needing help. It is totally okay to need help. That does not make you a failure. It actually makes you very brave and courageous to recognize your blind spots. They're not weaknesses, they're blind spots. Okay. And there are things that we need help with. Every single person in this world needs help with something. So it would be unfair to us to think that Black women don't need it as well. Actually, we'd be doing the same thing to ourselves that society does to us, and that's count us out and dismiss us. And we can't do that to ourselves. We have to make sure we are a part of the narrative. Okay. We have to make sure that we are kind of getting the things that we need and that we're putting ourselves first. So let's work on prioritizing. One of the things that you can actually do today is create a to-do list. All the things you have to do and put yourself in the first 3 spots of that to-do list. If you're not in the first 3 spots of that to-do list, then we are kind of getting out of space or getting out of touch with ourselves. And that's where we begin to lose ourselves. So in the next days to come, so I know this is the weekend, but when you are kind of starting your week and planning your week for next week, make that to-do list and see where you fall. Put yourself at the place that will help you actually grow. And self-care is just defined as that. Those things that can help you grow mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. If what you're doing is not adding to build you up in those areas, we need to go back to the drawing board. Okay. You can actually create a vision board of what it would look like to prioritize yourself. That's a great girlfriend circle activity. You can begin to do that, especially as we embark on the last couple months of 2020. What do we want our lives to look like with all of the things that are going on around us? How do I want to center myself? What are the things I want to do for myself? So it is imperative that we begin to take care of ourselves so that we can send a message to our legacies that it's okay to take care of themselves. This is not the days of our mother's time, our grandmother's time, where we actually did not talk about the things that were going on with us. We need to be having more and more of those conversations, and we need to be finding the safe space where we can actually do that. We need to be finding the safe space where it's okay for us to cry, where it's okay for us to let our guard down, where it's okay not to be the strong friend. And I want to talk about that for a couple minutes. Being the strong friend is actually detrimental to our growth. It's detrimental to our kind of relationship with ourselves. When we are only the strong friend, we become drained from everybody else's problems and we begin to pick up on the struggles of everybody else. What we do then is we open ourselves up and are more susceptible to things like vicarious PTSD. So somebody else is experiencing trauma, and by listening to their trauma all the time, we now have trauma. Vicarious, and maybe if it's not PTSD, it's still vicarious trauma, something that's not happening to you, but it's happening to somebody so close to you that you tend to have the mental effects of that. Sleep is huge. So being the strong friend can actually have us up all night with anxiety running over our minds about all the things we need to do because we didn't get to it because we're attending to everybody else's things. And being the strong friend increases our chances that we are suffering in silence. And that suffering in silence does not help us to thrive. It does not help us to grow. It does not help us to be more accountable. And that continues to deplete the community as a whole. Because if I go back to the first point, remember, we talked about Black women being the people who are the pillars of this society, this community. If we are not taking care of ourselves, especially with our mental health, we cannot create the society and communities that we want. Because I do honestly believe we are the cornerstones of a lot of these community or establishments and the ways that we kind of are navigating as a society. Okay, so I just want to do a really quick recap, and then we're gonna get out of here. Shedding the superwoman cape is important to our mental health because it helps us to show up first for ourselves so that we can show up better for others. Some practical things that you can do is create first a support system of people who you can lean on. Create or plan a vision board party where you're talking about vision board for myself. What do I want to manifest in my own life? Take some time to actually up level your self-care game. Go beyond the fluff of pink and fluffy and pretty frilly things and actually schedule those appointments. Get a therapist, take a hard look at yourself and think about the things you're doing that is causing problems for you and make a plan to actually change those. Start to get rid of that shame and guilt by recognizing where those messages are coming from and recognizing the untruths that are there. Begin to kind of think about ways that who you want to see yourself as and make small baby steps towards that. release ourselves from the need to kind of please and be everything to everybody and start being everything to yourself. Okay, so that is my time, and I want to make sure that you are kind of encouraged to go out today, go out in the rest of your weekend on into next week, knowing that it's okay for you to shed that superwoman cape and that you are still great in and of yourself. The things that I would ask you is just to lead with grace and compassion for yourself. Lead with that first, and all of that guilt and shame has no place. Thank y'all so much for being here. I am Dr. Ebony, and I hope y'all have an amazing weekend. And thank you so much to Higher Heights for having this particular event and putting this on and making space for Black women to have these types of conversations. So I want to do that over. Thank you so much to Higher Heights for America, the NAACP, and Own the Vote, and all the other partners that made today possible. I'm super excited that I can be a part of it. I am super excited that this space is being created for Black women, because we need this space, we need the permission, and we need to be having these conversations more and more amongst ourselves. So thank you so much.